We all know those GLP-1 injections work wonders, but that price tag almost gave me a heart attack when my insurance denied coverage. I was staring at a choice between paying my mortgage or paying for weight loss. Talk about a rock in a hard place. Then I found Elevate Health compounded semaglutide at just $58 with payment plans that don't require a second mortgage. Same medication, same results, but a price that real folks can actually afford. Visit joinelevate.com today. That's JOINELEVATE.com. Your wallet will be as happy as your waistline. This medication is not FDA approved.
Well, hello there, and welcome to another Infinite Inning Midweek Reissue episode. Let's get right to it. I appreciate that in these reissue episodes, you allow me the freedom to speak to you a little more frankly, to wander about to whatever topic suits us or suits the occasion than I tend to do on the regular weekly new programs. And given that freedom, I'm going to pick up pretty much exactly where we left off. In last week's regular full episode of this show, number 344, I talked about the day that William McKinley was shot by the assassin Leon Czolgosz. I was trying to make a distinction between a crazy person who claims to be acting for a cause and people legitimately trying to move that cause forward. Something that happens through the hard work of activism and persuasion, not a sudden stroke of violence. Even Adolf Hitler, as stubborn as he was, learned that fact when he tried to overthrow the government of Munich in 1923 and ended up in prison for not nearly long enough in very comfortable circumstances, but still. To sum up a much longer discussion that ranged over a lot of other stuff, Czolgosz said that he murdered McKinley because he was an enemy of the working man. Whether McKinley was that or he wasn't is totally beside the point, because only a diseased mind would draw some kind of through line, some sort of cause and effect thing that says that you murder the author of the conduct you don't like, and said conduct will magically cease. It will disappear from the world, all because you knocked over this one domino. You know, I can think of one very narrow circumstance in which that might be true. And that's if you come upon a fella who just hacked up a bunch of people with a meat cleaver, and now he is running at you with said cleaver. Then, if you shoot him, the bad conduct will certainly stop, but that's very limited, very local, and very much an exception. Rather, when you kill a leader, most people will just condemn you as a jerk, and in select circumstances, they will make a martyr of the person that you killed. To put it succinctly, nothing got better for the working man or for labor as the result of McKinley's assassination. If anything, they got worse and would continue to be worse for decades because he had given people license to condemn those most progressive forces who were agitating for improved conditions and compensation for workers. And yeah, some of those people were definitely nuts. It's not an endorsement of them. I talked about anarchism last time and what an empty idea that is. But they weren't all anarchists either. Some of them had good, wholesome ideas, and they got tarred with that same brush as a result of Czolgosz's actions. That gave the forces of repression further license. And again, there's just no, if I do A, then B happens kind of connection between murdering a president and making anything better for anyone. Today, as I speak these words, we learned that the murderer who inspired that discussion of baseball on September 6th, 1901, did what he did, at least according to a tranche of text messages included in the charging document, because he was, quote, sick of the hate, unquote, his victim inspired. The content of the victim's speech, to be honest, am not very familiar with it. I had not spent any time thinking about this person at all prior to last week. However, various reputable sources have compiled a number of his quotes, and I urge you to go read them and decide for yourself. But again, that said, it's totally irrelevant. While there are limits on free speech, while the paradox of tolerance says that we as a society should not be forced to allow speech so free it causes our own destruction, in the vast majority of cases, The right to free speech requires us to endure thoughts that we despise and hope that in the marketplace of thought, good ideas drive out bad. Right now, that doesn't seem to be happening much, and I'm not sure it's because of the vitality of one set of ideas over another, so much as it's not the invisible hand that's guiding that marketplace, but rather that a different sort of hand, a very visible set of hands, is leaning on it or has fingers at its back, and not in a nice massagey or tickling sort of way. If the only option is McDonald's, it's not a dining hall of ideas, that is. That is a different discussion. The larger point here today is that there is no logic in what the alleged perpetrator did. It's like saying that if you kiss the cat, life will get better for the mice. All the mice everywhere, via some magical form of transference. Or that, and forgive me for saying this, if you kill the cat, then all cats will cease to behave like cats and spare the mice. That's not how cats or people work. And yes, one of my cats is sitting right here, literally beneath the microphone, and just gave me what I would consider by cat standards to be a very dirty look. Now, that's not to say that assassins haven't changed history. What John Wilkes Booth did to Abraham Lincoln might be a kind of exception, not because it saved the South from losing the Civil War, but because by replacing Lincoln with Andrew Johnson, he brought in a president who wasn't interested in making changes to the country that were necessary to cement the verdict of combat. The opposite. He wanted to put everything back the way it was as much as possible, which left a lot of erstwhile traitors back in positions of power, doing what they could to thwart progress wherever they could. And so we got Jim Crow, and we got a great many other problems that still vex us today. But I will say this. If society wasn't ready to support those changes, the ones that the radical Republicans were pushing at that time, they wouldn't have happened, even if the result of the war was that the Northerners shot all the high-ranking Confederates afterwards. It would have required a more or less permanent military occupation and no national reconciliation, which I'm not sure we ever really got anyway, which is a different discussion. Again, I feel like I'm saying that a lot today, as is the permanently morally ambiguous question of whether a national reconciliation was worthwhile given on whose backs and how much pain had to be endured for it to happen, to the extent that it did. But now I'm getting very far afield, and the major point that I want to make is that change is about convincing people to agree with your program, not punching them until they are forced to say that they do. That's why anyone who does what this young man did is, to put it simply, nuts or simple or both. And that truth, which I think is well understood by people who do effort to change public opinion, is why I very much doubt that anyone aimed him in the direction that he ultimately went, just as no one, and I discussed this in the last episode, aimed Leon Czolgosz. The episode we're revisiting this week goes back to the program's first year and reflects on a sudden career-altering injury, and then proceeds to discuss one of the game's most accomplished weird pitchers and what happened when a leader, Leo DeRocher, lied about him and that lie spun out of control. It's a great story of how not to handle a clubhouse. And maybe not any other situation either. The first story, as you will hear momentarily, was inspired by then Yankees rookie outfielder Dustin Fowler, whose career had barely started before it was interrupted by a severe and seemingly preventable injury. I didn't know, back when I was first talking to you about this, whether his injury would be career-ending or not. It wasn't exactly, but it does seem like it caused it to be truncated in a real way. In fact, it's over now, and he's still only 30. It's been over for a while, in fact. Now, a lot of players have brief careers for any number of reasons, so maybe his would have proceeded along roughly the same lines regardless, but it's impossible to know for sure. The only thing we do know for sure is that the injury was real and severe. It was inflicted by a feature of the White Sox ballpark, and that aspect of it was clear enough that he subsequently sued the White Sox, and as far as I can tell, the case has not settled, but rather goes on 7 years later in its Jarndyce v. Jarndyce way. When we at Baseball Prospectus wrote about Fowler in 2018, in the immediate aftermath of the injury, we said, before the injury, Fowler was a well-rounded lefty with good speed and the classic problem of well-rounded outfielders everywhere. Is he just a tweener? In his case, the concern is less about a lack of power and more about whether he'll get on base enough because of his aggressive approach. Now, by that time, the Yankees, in their Yankees-ish way, had traded him to the A's for Sonny Gray. The A's gave Fowler an extended trial in 2018, and he was pretty terrible primarily because of the aggressive approach at the plate that we described. Now, did the knee injury have anything to do with that? Did it deprive him of a crucial step on the base paths that would have let him beat out some infield hits or play center well enough to be a fourth outfielder despite his bad approach at the plate? Again, impossible to say, but you would have liked to have seen him get a clean chance to try. That the White Sox had a hidden hazard in their park deprived him of that chance. Now, before I turn you over to my past self, I'd like to leave you with a little baseball story I came across earlier today. I'm not going to give you the precise version that I saw from 1941 because the point of the author seems to have been that people of color are stupid. I do not believe that, as I do not believe it universally about any group or collection of people. I'd like to alter it, in fact, so that it's clear its point is that baseball players are resilient. That's how I read the original. Resilient or optimistic. That the author was so prejudiced, he missed the moral of his own story. For all I know, it wasn't even his story. The tale may be so old it has whiskers. It doesn't matter. There's still some value to it. It goes like this. A man happens to pass a ball game in progress. It's an informal neighborhood game, not a major league or even minor league game, so he could just walk right up to the players and ask how things were going. "What's the score?" the man asks the first baseman. 94-0. The first baseman replies. "Getting beaten rather badly, aren't you?" the man says. "No, sir," the first baseman replies. "We ain't been up to bat yet." And that's the whole thing. So I ask, is the first baseman dumb or just optimistic? And let me point out a special irony of the author landing on one side or the other of that question. As I said, this was printed in October of 1941. 2 months later, Pearl Harbor happened. The Japanese sank a whole bunch of our ships and killed a great many Americans. For us, World War II had finally begun, and we were getting beaten rather badly, weren't we? It seems to me that the first baseman's answer, "No, sir, we ain't been up to bat yet," turned out to be a valid reply. That's it from me for this reissue episode. You'll hear from me occasionally the rest of the way if I have to patch over any old breaks, and at the end of the show. Let's take a break now. On the other side, we'll get to that story of an ancient but still very memorable career-altering injury, and then we'll make another stop at Brooklyn. I hope you enjoy those old Dodger stories as much as I do telling them, and as always, thank you for joining me for this reissue episode of The Infinite Inning. I'll see you on the other side. Or shall I say my younger self will, because we're going time traveling. All aboard!
Bugs crashing your pack's party? Whether they've got paws or sneakers, your pack deserves a home that's protected from pests. That's where Wondercide comes in. Plant-powered protection made with steam-distilled natural essential oils that actually work. It kills and repels fleas, ticks, mosquitoes, and ants without questionable ingredients or overpowering smells. Safe to use around kids and pets when used as directed. Lab-proven to work fast. And proudly made in the USA. We offer sprays for pets, people, homes, and yards. Plus, spot-on treatments, collars, and even shampoos. Whatever your pack needs, we've got it covered. Founded by a pet parent looking for a better way to protect her dog Luna, Wondercide's now protected over 21 million lives and counting. You might have even seen us on Shark Tank. Go to Wondercide.com and use code WONDER20 for 20% off your first order. That's WONDER20 at Wondercide.com. Wondercide. Protect your pack with plant-powered Wondercide today.
The cruel nature of the infinite inning is that it's a state of being where the road is shorter than the journey is long. Maybe that sounds like a cheap irony, but it seems like a fair analogy for the nature of life and time. We'll never perfect this project, whatever project we're talking about, whatever our individual projects are. We'd like to keep trying to pursue the third out, but there are more batters to face than there is time. Paul Valéry said that works of art are never completed, only abandoned. So too our lives and whatever progress we hope to make within them. I was deeply moved by what happened last week to the young Yankees outfielder Dustin Fowler. In case you missed it, the kid began the season as a Yankees prospect, although not a particularly highly ranked one. He was somewhere in the middle of the pack in a deep farm system. He's just 22 years old, and he moved up through a combination of attrition and his own good play, and finally got the call to the majors. He lasted not quite half an inning in his debut at Chicago against the White Sox. He didn't get to bat in the first inning, and when he went to right field for the bottom of the first, he chased a slicing fly ball that went down the foul line off the bat of Jose Abreu, and he didn't quite judge the low fence and the guardrail out there quite correctly, and he slammed into it with his knee. Joe Girardi, the Yankees manager, said there was an electrical box in there too. It's hard to see that on the video. But in either case, he ruptured his patella tendon and he's gone for the year. His major league debut, rookie season, and possibly his career all becoming highly attenuated at once. It was deeply upsetting to see someone achieve their dream and then have it snatched away all at the same time. With modern sports medicine, there's a good chance that Fowler can make it back in a reasonable period of time, not this year, but perhaps next year, and in roughly the same shape that he started in. But you don't know until it happens. You don't know if the opportunity will be there, if the ability will still be there, the mobility will still be there, the emotional ability, the sense of confidence, the poise that allows one to succeed in the high-pressure environment that is professional baseball. A great deal can change. You can change when you've suffered a severe injury, and what happens after isn't just about how that part of your body that was hurt responds to rehabilitation. I'm speaking from personal experience to an extent in that you've heard me refer to having had cancer on this program, and I had, when I was 32, ocular cancer, and the treatment for that to save my life caused me to be blind in one eye. And it's a small thing, a really small thing. And given that people die of cancer, I'm still here, and people lose more important things, lungs and chunks of their colon, and suffer all kinds of other disabling or debilitating effects. But I can tell you it's greatly affected my life, not just in the sheer number of things I bump into, including people when I'm walking down the street because I don't see them, but in my reluctance to go places and do things, and it's made me less social. It's made me uncomfortable in crowds. And don't get me wrong, I'm so grateful to be alive when so many other people who've received diagnoses like mine are not. But it turns out that you can have feelings of depression and inadequacy just based on something as small as a non-functional eye. So even if Fowler does come back and play at a high level, and I really do hope that he does, he might not be the same in some fundamental way. Fowler's mishap and quick exit might put you in mind of the story of someone like Moonlight Graham, the player who was performed by an elderly Burt Lancaster with so much twinkle he might have been using PEDs in the movie Field of Dreams. Not a fictional character, in 1905, Graham played a fraction of the game for the New York Giants and then never appeared in the majors again. But for some reason I kept thinking of Joe Hauser, the young Philadelphia Athletics first baseman at the beginning of the 1920s. The parallel isn't perfect because he got a few years in before his career went wrong, but the comparison still seems apt. Very briefly, and I'm not going to do the story justice just now, Hauser was a young first baseman out of Milwaukee. He was called Unser Joe, our Joe, by the German population there, and he came up with the A's in 1922. He was quite the hitter, a left-hander. He had a lot of power. He finished second to Babe Ruth in home runs in 1924. He was a distant second, but there's no shame in being second to Babe Ruth in anything. In the brief time that he was a regular in the major leagues, he was routinely among the home run leaders. But it was all over by the time he was 25, and here's why. Just before the 1925 season started, which would have been his fourth campaign, the A's played an exhibition game, and a batter hit a ground ball between first and second. Hauser went to make the play, and his knee spontaneously and completely split in half down the middle. No one had touched him. There was no inciting incident. Obviously, there had to be some pre-existing flaw there, but it just broke. And that was the end of his season. He was 15 weeks in the hospital. It had to be sewed back together essentially with wire. He could never get reestablished in the major leagues, even though his bat did recover. Some of it was the knee struggled to regain flexibility. Some of it Hauser blamed on Ty Cobb, who was having his last year in the majors when Hauser was making another run at playing time, and Hauser claimed that Cobb sabotaged him with batting tips that were designed to make him fail. So he went back down to the minor leagues, and he just kept hitting. No one cared. He hit 63 home runs in 1930 for Baltimore of the International League. He hit 69 in 1933 for the Minneapolis Millers, and people talked about that the park had short fences and so on, but fine, discount them. It doesn't matter. He had the ability to play, and he could have helped a major league team, but no one called. The other knee went, and still he kept playing. He played until he was 43 years old. He lived until he was 98, and still no one called. Maybe the scouts just had a view they couldn't be budged off of. Maybe they thought that the kind of guy who would let Ty Cobb argue him out of his swing wasn't someone who was going to succeed. It's impossible to know at this late date, but it's frightening. Imagine you're a writer in possession of a great novel or screenplay. Imagine you're a holy man who claims he can perceive the nature of the divine. Imagine you're one of the greatest home run hitters of all time, with 399 in the minor leagues and another 80 in the major leagues, and no one in the majors will give you the time of day. The opportunity was there, and it was gone, and you do everything you can to earn it back, and it just will not be restored to you. That isn't Moses being shown the promised land, but being denied entry to it. That is the deafness of an unfair world, and it scares the heck out of me. I'm Stephen Goldman, and this is the Infinite Inning Baseball Podcast. Hello there! The tunnel under the POW camp was not discovered by the Germans until it was too late, and now you're closing in on the Swiss border, just beyond the mountains, the refuge that is Episode 11. I hope you packed lightly. A couple of minutes on the subject of fake news, a really fascinating topic in that it's now used to invalidate things you don't like. We get involved in the liar's paradox, the idea that you can say something like, "This statement is false," and you're automatically tied up in a conundrum because if it is false, then it's true, and if it's true, it's false. So we have this way of messing with people's minds, and that's labeling something as fake news, but baseball doesn't have that. Say you're a Blue Jays fan, and last night Aaron Judge hit a home run against you. You can't really take that fact and say fake news about it. Aaron Judge did not hit a home run against my team because it's either in the box score or it's not. It's either on the videotape or it's not. And unless you're going to claim that someone has altered either of those things in a massive conspiracy to boost Aaron Judge's home run totals, actually Yankee Stadium is a massive conspiracy to boost Aaron Judge's home run totals. But that's another story. Anyway, you can't invalidate that fact just by calling it something fake. The closest thing that we have to that is trade rumors. And I would think that people like our own John Heyman and Ken Rosenthal and so on are responsible, but that hasn't always been the case. And even when they are responsible, it sometimes might as well be fake, because if you see a story that says, say, the Astros covet Jose Quintana, well, okay, they covet him. I mean, you may covet Jennifer Lawrence, but that's as far as it goes. Similarly, you may read a story that says the Astros have called the White Sox about Jose Quintana, and you may have called Jennifer Lawrence, but she may not call you back. So again, like, people have conversations all the time. They wish for things all the time. They want things all the time. They may even ask for them all the time. But the fact that they have those feelings is not necessarily news. And yet even that may be real. The closest thing I can think of to a story like that actually is fake but did have an impact on the real world is that supposedly the reason that Yogi Berra got to be manager of the Yankees in 1964 is that some bored sports writers decided to start a rumor Yankees considering Yogi Berra for manager, and waited to see how fast it would bounce back to them along the twilight bark, the telephone line of sports journalism. And somehow in the process of that happening, the Yankees sort of went, oh, we're considering him? Well, I suppose we should get him signed then. So he got to be manager for a while, and even if he wasn't quite prepared for it and the circumstances weren't ideal in a lot of ways, they did win the pennant. But that was something that began as fake news and became real news. I don't think it happens that way very often. And here's another thing that doesn't happen. Baseball pioneered the idea of confronting your accuser when it comes to the guy who's shouting fake news. And it's really only happened once that I can think of, but it's so enticing. It's so attractive as something that should happen, that you should have the right to testify on the behalf of the story that you're filing one way or another, right or wrong. This happened in Brooklyn in 1943. It is a long and elaborate story, and I'm going to try to tell it quickly and kind of boil it down to the essentials. I'm going to do this from memory, or mostly from memory, so forgive me if I fudge anything. It involves Leo DeRocher, who is managing the Brooklyn Dodgers at that point, and Leo was not a guy who ever exactly had a reputation for, let's say, sterling conduct or honesty. I mean, going back to when he first came to the major leagues as a shortstop with the Yankees, he was accused of being a clubhouse thief, and Babe Ruth, and he got into a fist fight because supposedly he stole Babe Ruth's watch out of his locker. And he just kind of rolled on that way, doing what he felt like doing and not necessarily telling the truth. If he got caught, he'd just deny it. Harold Parrott of the Brooklyn Daily Eagle wrote, "On the charge of denying statements he'd unquestionably made, DeRocher has been convicted before. Lippy's behavior is based almost entirely on convenience. If it becomes inconvenient to have said something, Leo just decides he never did say it. Veteran newspapermen have known this for years, but apparently Lippy's players have just discovered it." Remind me to comment another time on the defunct Brooklyn Daily Eagle's habit in the 40s and 50s of its sports section referring to everyone by nicknames, so that every story about a game is that Lippy ordered Dixie to throw the ball to Goo-Goo, and you really have to have a code. It's not a difficult code, but it's just so cute as to be really annoying. Goo-Goo, by the way, was Augie Gallen, a really underrated player, kind of the Bernie Williams of the 30s and 40s, but I as usual, digress. Okay, so 1943. The Dodgers are a really good team, although they're being sapped by World War II. They won 100 games in the pennant in 1941. They won 100 in 1942, but they finished second to the Cardinals, who won even more. Some of the good players are starting to go into the military, and they're patching with a lot of veterans. Archie Vaughan, the great Pirates shortstop, is playing for them in place of Pee Wee Reese, and Paul Wainer, who's 40, is in their outfield, and they have some other veteran guys like the aforementioned Dixie Walker, the first baseman Dolph Camilli, and pitchers like the rage-filled Johnny Allen, and most essential in this story, Bobo Newsom. Bobo on his own is a long story, and there's so many things that we could talk about with him. The fact that he changed teams 17 times, the fact that he played for the Washington Senators 5 times and the Browns 3 times and the Dodgers twice and so on. That he called everybody Bobo, including himself. So it was both a first and a third person name. He was a 200-game winner and a 200-game loser. Sometimes he was Max Scherzer and sometimes he was Bud Norris. He lost 20 games 3 times, but he also won 20 games 3 times. Although one of those times he had an ERA of 5.08. He was an extraordinary player. The thing that I love about him perhaps most is that he was virtually indestructible. I mean, not only did he pitch into his 40s, but he suffered injuries on the field that were so horrific that would hospitalize any player today, and yet he would stay in the game. This is from, and this is later in that year, 1943, a description of a game that he pitched against the St. Louis Browns, because by the end of this story, although he starts with the Dodgers, I will tell you ahead of time that he does not finish the story with the Dodgers. The score was 2-2 in the last of the 5th when pitcher Oscar Lefty Judd of the Red Sox blasted a drive which caromed off Newsom's left forehead, over Don Gutteridge's head, and into deep right center field. Bobo slightly blocked the smash with his glove hand, but only slightly, and it was fortunate for him then that the ball hit him a glancing blow. He did not collapse or even fall to the ground. He walked to the Browns' dugout, sat on top of the step for cold water applications, and was greeted with wild cheers when he gamely returned. Allow me to translate. The Browns pitcher hit a 400-foot line drive off of the opposing pitcher's head, and the pitcher stayed in the game. This seems like a good place to take a quick break and allow you to go out to the lobby and buy yourself a snack. I'd buy it for you, honest, but I'm not there right now. I'm in here, in this box. On the other side, more tales of Bobo being insensible to pain.
That was not unusual for Bobo. There was an opening day when he was with the Senators when Franklin Roosevelt was in attendance, and after Roosevelt signed a ball for him, he signed a ball for Roosevelt even though Roosevelt did not ask for him to do that. He then went to the mound. The Indians were the opposing team. He got ahead of Earl Averill, shouted, "Now Bobo will strike you out with a curveball." Averill, knowing this, was on top of the curveball and lined it up the middle off of Bobo's knee. That was the first inning. He stayed in and completed the game. It was only after that he said to the trainer, "Bobo thinks his leg is broke." And indeed, Bobo's leg was broken. He had pitched the entire game that way. On another occasion, he was pitching against the Yankees, and Ben Chapman laid down a bunt, and the Senators' third baseman, Ossie Bluege, came in and made a great play and was going to fire the ball to first, but either he or Bobo did not realize that Bobo's head was in the way and at point-blank range. Bobo was sculled by his own third baseman, and all the descriptions of the game say that he sort of did a weird little dance. Wounded moose is the term that's often used. He sort of stumbled around the infield confusedly for a moment, but once again he stayed in, and he threw a complete game shutout. His jaw had been broken in 2 places. On yet another occasion, I believe this was when he was pitching very successfully for the Detroit Tigers, the throw from the first baseman on a 3-1 putout tailed into the runner, leading the runner to run into Bobo's pitching hand. His thumb was broken in 2 places, and again, he stayed in, or in this case, at least he tried. It's hard to grip your pitches when your thumb is swelling and you can't really move it. Sometimes he's portrayed as stupid, but I don't think he was stupid. I think he was fairly smart. I think he was amused. I think he did a lot to entertain himself. I think he did a lot to entertain others. And since he was often stuck on tail-end clubs, he kind of did what he could to attract a crowd. He figured that would make him more valuable. He even said as much. By 1943, he's in his mid-30s. He's pitching for the Dodgers. He's actually leading the team in wins at this point in the season. But in mid-July, there's an incident. The Dodgers have a kid shortstop who they're trying to convert to catcher named Bobby Bragan. Bragan would be in the game for forever as a coach and manager and that kind of thing. But at this point, he's just struggling to hang on. And he's the battery with Newsom in this game. In the early innings of the game, there's a 3-2 pitch with a runner on third, and there's a cross-up. The catcher, Bragan, is expecting a fastball, and Newsom threw something else. What it was the subject of the controversy. The ball took a weird break, and it bounced and goes all the way to the backstop, and the runner scores. Now, this turns out to be immaterial to the outcome of the game, which the Dodgers eventually come back and win. But in the moment, Newsom showed a lot of frustration. He put his hands on his hips. At the end of the inning, he threw his glove in the air, and this was obviously embarrassing to the kid catcher. Leo DeRocher, who liked the kid very much, was really angry, and there had been conflicts between him and Newsom already, in part because Leo is a super type A person. Newsom is kind of a super type Z person. He's incredibly relaxed and mellow. And again, not somebody who takes coaching real well, possibly because he knows he cannot be killed. There's a confrontation after the game in the clubhouse about how Newsom had shown up Bragan and how Newsom had thrown a spitter and crossed the kid up, and he did it just to make him look bad. And words go back and forth. And at the end of it, DeRocher says to Newsom, "You're suspended. And you're suspended indefinitely for the season if I can get Branch Rickey to make it stick." All right, fine. This is like a thing that happens. Tempers get overheated. DeRocher would do this sometimes. Newsom provoked people into it plenty of times. Not a big deal. But DeRocher made a mistake. The timing of the argument is such that the rest of the players don't witness it. They don't know about the suspension. And Leo, still in the clubhouse, feeling his manhood a little bit in this moment of leadership, starts bragging on the argument and what he had told Newsom in earshot of a reporter. And the reporter asks, "Is this for publication?" And Leo is okay with it. And eventually it finds its way into the paper. The first the players hear about it is when they read it over breakfast the next morning. And they're outraged. It seems like an overreaction, and Leo's been riding them hard, so they don't have a lot of tolerance for this kind of dictatorial behavior. Particularly Archie Vaughan is incredibly upset by this. Players come in for the game and there's a confrontation in the clubhouse. They ask Leo, did you really say all that stuff? Did you really suspend Newsom for the season? And he, desperate, cornered, denies it. They don't buy it at all. They do not buy it. Archie Vaughan turns in his uniform and says he's done with the team, that DeRocher's a liar. He's not going to play for a guy who lies, because if DeRocher lied about Newsom, he could lie about him. Dixie Walker also refuses to play. And suddenly the Dodgers don't have a team. The umpires send a bat boy in to say, you guys didn't show up on the field for batting practice. We're ready to start the game. Where are you? And DeRocher actually has to say, well, we'll see if we have 9 guys. If we have 9 guys, we'll play. If we don't, we're going to forfeit. And there's an extraordinary scene as he goes down the roster saying, Billy Herman, do you want to play? Yes or no? Paul Wainer, do you want to play? Yes or no? Now, the players have already gotten word from Branch Rickey that if they refuse to play, they're not only going to be suspended, they're going to be blacklisted. So everybody but Archie Vaughan goes along with it. Archie Vaughan stays in his civilian clothes. He has literally given his uniform to Leo DeRocher and told him to shove it up his ass. Meanwhile, DeRocher has called the sports writer who was standing right there, his name was Tim Cohane, and denied the story and called it a lie. He's called it a lie to the players. He's called it a lie to the reporter. The reporter, who was not in the ballpark that day, it was his day off, calls Branch Rickey and says, I demand the right to confront my accuser. And the next day, even though Leo and Rickey, they don't want this, there is another clubhouse meeting. In front of all the players and the assembled writers, Cohane cross-examines Leo DeRocher, even concluding with the prosecution rests. DeRocher is rapidly forced to admit that, yes, it all actually did happen the way it was reported. The crime is a small crime. It's that he looks petty. And then, as usual, the cover-up was the worst thing, that he lied, and it was one lie too many for his players. At this point, the Dodgers hit the All-Star break, and for a few days, DeRocher's job hung in the balance. His credibility is just shot. Ultimately, Rickey decided to keep him on. However, that didn't leave him with much ability to keep the players on, and he had to clean house. Veterans start leaving town. Somehow, Newsom goes through waivers instantly and winds up back with the Browns, and perhaps not coincidentally, this was one day before he was due to receive a rostering bonus. The Dodgers, who were a close second to the Cardinals at that moment, have a losing record over the rest of the season, and they don't really get back to where they were going until after the war. The biggest casualty is probably Vaughan, who was so disgusted with DeRocher that, although he did finish the season, he immediately retired and stayed retired for 3 years. He came back in 47 after Leo was gone. This directly impacted his Hall of Fame candidacy. He made it in 1985, but it was long after he was dead. Now, it wasn't something he was fated to live to see in any case, because he died young at 40 in a boating accident. He drowned in Crater Lake. Nonetheless, the missing time retarded his career totals, and it took voters a while to look around the counting stats to see the sheer quality of the player. Regardless, think about the drama of that scene, but think also about the attempt to bring integrity to the proceedings. Leo DeRocher had popped off at a pitcher, done something too extreme, and then, to cover it up, said, fake news. And the reporter who wrote the story went before him, went before his peers, went before the players, defended himself, and it was revealed not to be fake news. Leo was shown to be a liar. The revolt was suppressed because players didn't have a lot of rights in those days, and there really wasn't anywhere for them to go with it anyway once Rickey decided to sustain DeRocher in his job. But shouldn't it be that way? I don't know how we would do it at scale, but there has to be a way, because you cannot convince people in the culture at large, the society at large, that a story is true when there are two sides. There are always people who will have so open a mind that they will consider both sides, even when it is literally impossible for both sides to have equal legitimacy. Or they will have such a fealty to a voice of authority that says fake news that they will say, okay, must be fake news, because that guy wouldn't lie. He's the voice of authority. This is a problem in people, a cognitive problem that you might call, and other people did call in other contexts, the leadership principle. The only way to show them the reality of a situation, the accuracy of a situation, is to change the way they perceive that story. And there's only one way to do that. Get people's attention, lay it out step by step the way Cohane did, and force them to process it. Further, the denialists, the people who cry fake news, the impetus should be as much on them to prove the veracity of what they're saying as on the people presenting the story in the first place, if not more so. They're the ones who should be presenting evidence that what they're saying isn't fake news. DeRocher couldn't do that. The reporter said, were you in this time and place? DeRocher had to say yes. Were you talking to this person? DeRocher had to say yes. And did you actually do this thing? And DeRocher had to say yes. And that was the end of it. And you know what? For that and for many other reasons, Leo, too, didn't get into the Hall of Fame until after his death, and it was purely punitive. And I'm not saying that it was the right thing to do or that it was directly related to that 1943 incident, but it was part of it. He damaged his credibility forever. And you know what? That's a worthwhile thing. That is a great achievement, not for DeRocher, but for everyone else, for all of us. And if we had that in our lives, this would be a better world to live in. By Neptune's beard, we have reached the end of another episode.
So here was where I used to tell you about where the guests were on Twitter and how to follow me on Twitter, but these reissues mostly eschew the guest, last week's show with Davey Johnson being the glaring exception. And as I always say in this reissue episode, I am no longer on Twitter, and neither are you. I hope you're not, but you can follow me at Stephen Goldman at bsky.social. This was so long ago, I list an old and long defunct publication as my home. Grateful for the opportunity.
infiniteinning@gmail.com. Always happy to hear from you. I'm sometimes a little tardy in responding, but I will, I promise. And please rate us, review us, subscribe at the podcatcher of your choice, and iTunes especially. It helps to get the word out. No sponsor this week, so we'll just say that we're brought to you by the number 21. Our producer suffered a broken kneecap in a wiffle ball game when he told me he'd strike me out on a curveball. Thing is, I'm partially blind. Anybody can strike me out, so I'd like to think that the spontaneous fracturing of his knee was an act of God, a punishment for his hubris and general insensitivity to the mildly handicapped. Our theme song, The Infinite Man, which you have heard throughout this episode and in fact are hearing now, was co-written by myself and Dr. Richard Mooring. I'd tell you what he's up to, but he's been on vacation and he doesn't love me enough anymore to even send a postcard. Well, if I can just get this bathysphere to lift me off the muddy bottom of the Challenger Deep, it's a long way up. I'll be back next week with more tales and discussion from inside the Infinite Inning.
Thanks again for joining me for this reissue. I'll see you this weekend for episode 345. All new.